Behind glass in Fort Pierce. The parkerized finish is worn to bare metal at the grip points. Everywhere else, intact. Official status, museum exhibit with an inventory number. Real status, 3 years through the Mekong Delta, recorded in the surface of phosphated steel. What does a weapon look like after 3 years through the Mekong Delta? Worn at the contact points, nowhere else. Left hand on the forestock, the parkerizing stripped along the checkering. Pass by pass. Pistol grip, the metal under the thumb is bare, bright against the surrounding mat. The sling attachment point carries a groove worn into the steel from 3 years of strap pull. Every mark is documented use. Every undamaged surface marks the absence of contact. The UDT/Seal Museum in Fort Pierce opened in 1985. Most exhibits in those cases are surplus samples or captured equipment, objects without documented owners. Sweetheart is not that. Senior Chief James Dennis Watson III carried it through the Delta and donated it personally. The provenance is unambiguous. 6 pounds, 8 rounds, 7 in the extended tube, 1 chambered. No ejection port, no trigger reset, no gap for the jungle to enter. The Army chose something else. In June 1970, Watson carried Sweetheart through the corridor at Ton Sun Nut Air Base. The Army was already buying differently. The Stevens Model 77E cost $31.50 per unit, $6.61 less than the Ithaca. 60,920 went to the field. The Ithaca 37 did not. White museum lighting hits the receiver at a flat angle. The display glass in front of it is clean. The duckbill choke extends forward. The pistol grip shows where the thumb wore through the finish across 3 years of daily carry. 2 surfaces in the same frame. Clean glass, abraded steel. No caption required. Watson carried Sweetheart into the canal and out again. 0 misfires. 3 years, including the canal. Sweetheart outlasted the man who carried it. Watson died on October 27, 2013, 76 years old. Plank owner of SEAL Team 2, one of the originals when the unit commissioned at Little Creek, Virginia in 1962. His last years were at the UDT/Seal Museum in Fort Pierce. North Hutchinson Island, the same ground where naval combat demolition units trained during the Second World War. Watson served as curator emeritus. Most exhibits were production samples or recovered hardware. Sweetheart was the only piece transferred by the operator who carried it. He co-authored Point Man with Kevin Dockery. It became standard reading inside the SEAL community. Dick Marcinko put him in the Rogue Warrior series. The record existed in print, twice over. When sniper school classes rotated through Fort Pierce, Watson held parties at his house. Younger SEALs drove specifically to find him. He walked them through the cases. He told them things that weren't in any field manual. How the weapon held under 3 years of Mekong Delta operations, where the spec sheet ended and operational reality took over. By 2013, authenticated Vietnam-era Ithaca 37s with U.S. military stamps sold at auction for more than $3,500. The Army had originally paid $38.11 each. What Watson gave those operators in Fort Pierce had no doctrine number. It was what the Ithaca had actually done, not what any procurement record said it could. Watson guided young SEALs through that museum until the day he died. The 47,000 Ithacas the Army left in Southeast Asia in 1973 had no such record. They stayed in warehouses outside Saigon with no retrieval order and no inventory tag. Why did the Army choose the Remington 870 over the Ithaca? Production economics. Peacetime standardization. Slamfire made range safety officers uncomfortable. It required documented exceptions, signed approvals, a procedural deviation that no one wanted to defend in a post-war review cycle. The Remington 870 is a reliable weapon with a long service record. It is also roughly 0.6 pounds heavier than the Ithaca 37, and it ejects from the side, an additional opening for mud and debris in jungle conditions. It does not slam fire. The military selected it after the war, under evaluation criteria that had no category for what a point man needed in triple canopy terrain at close range. When American forces withdrew in 1973, most of the Ithacas stayed behind. No depot recovery, no repatriation to stateside armories. The Stevens 77E units stayed too. The guns remained in country, while the army that issued them did not. The collector market registered what the procurement process had not. Vietnam-era Ithaca 37s with S-prefix serial numbers between 1,000 and 23,000, U.S. stamped on the receiver, became among the most carefully authenticated military shotgun collectibles in current circulation. Demand produced fakes. Civilian Model 37s with cut-down barrels and reproduction military markings sold at premiums to buyers who wanted a documented original. Nobody pursues the Stevens 77E with comparable effort. The weapon the procurement system discarded became the specimen the market now authenticates by receiver stamp. 47,000 Ithacas stayed in Southeast Asia after the 1973 withdrawal. Watson's was not among them. He had carried it out himself. The war was still running in June of 1970. The withdrawal and the 1973 handover were 3 years out. Watson carried his Ithaca Model 37 through a corridor at Tan Son Nhut Air Base, and he was ready to explain it to anyone who asked. An Air Force colonel stopped him. The duckbill choke caught the light first. A flattened metal fitting on the muzzle. It spread the shot pattern 25 degrees wide instead of a tight cylinder. The colonel's eyes locked on the attachment, not on the shotgun, on the attachment. Watson stopped. The fitting shifted against the barrel as the sling settled. One short metallic sound, then quiet. Senior Chief James Dennis Watson III, SEAL Team 2 plank owner, one of the original operators from 1962 when the unit stood up. 3 combat tours, 16 decorations, 4 Bronze Stars, each carrying a Combat 5, the device the Army awarded for valor under direct enemy fire. The colonel had a clean uniform. He told Watson that shotguns were prohibited under the Geneva Convention. Watson didn't lower the weapon. He didn't shift his stance. He told the colonel, send him to Geneva and he'd leave her at home. Until then, they didn't part company. That answer wasn't formed in that corridor. It was formed 4 years earlier, in a show, where the geometry of the fight had made the Ithaca something other than a preference. He walked out of that conversation still carrying her. The Tan Son Nhut corridor came 4 years after a show. By the time Watson faced that colonel, the argument was already over. Settled in March 1966. 75% of the CIDG irregulars came out dead or wounded. 5 of 17 Special Forces soldiers didn't come out at all. What does 75% look like inside a single fight? A Shao 1966. Of every 4 irregulars who entered that valley, 3 were casualties before it ended. 1 man, 1 shotgun. The Ithaca weighed 6.3 pounds empty. 40 shells added roughly 10 pounds on top of that. Before the M1911, water, rations, and the radio battery that cycled through the patrol. The numbers were fixed. The terrain wasn't. Triple canopy jungle. Engagement distances under 10 meters. The A Shao Valley ran roughly 20 miles long and 1 mile wide. A corridor flanked by ridge lines that NVA regulars had held for months before the camp came under attack. At 10 meters or less in that canopy, the duckbill choke spread the shot pattern to 25 degrees horizontal. Aim became a secondary consideration. Direction was everything. A rifle required a clear sector. The Ithaca required a direction. 2 helicopters went down during the evacuation. The surviving defenders extracted on the aircraft that made it through. The camp that had been operational since 1963 was left under enemy fire. 3 years before A Shao, the Army ran a procurement competition. 1963. 4 manufacturers, 4 prices. Savage Stevens submitted $31.50 per unit. High Standard bid $33.25. Ithaca quoted $38.11. Remington asked $55.43. The contract went to Stevens. 60,920 Model 77E shotguns. Procurement began that year. On paper, the weapon met specifications. In the field, the jungle found every weakness it had. The aluminum trigger guard cracked under sustained recoil. The birch stock split at the receiver wrist under hard use. Birch stock painted to look like walnut, to look like it cost more than it did. Inside, same birch. Bruce Canfield documented the pattern in The American Rifleman. He used measured language. Nagging reliability problems. That phrase covered what happened when a man's life depended on a mechanism not failing. In the 25th Infantry Division, Specialist 4th Class Danny Cogg walked second in the column on a patrol near Cu Chi. Late 1968. The point man moved ahead of him through the undergrowth. The ambush opened. The point man racked the pump. A low, dry crack, birch splitting at the receiver wrist, and the forend came off in his hand. The point man reached for his sidearm. Cogg pivoted left and covered the gap with his M16 until the line stabilized. That night, Cogg told his platoon sergeant he wanted the next Ithaca that came in. 3 weeks later, he got one. He carried it to rotation. $6.61. The margin between the gun that held and the one that didn't. The Army purchased 60,920 of the cheaper model. The American defense budget in 1963 stood at $52.8 billion. Total savings from choosing Stevens over Ithaca, roughly $403,000. $403,000 against $52.8 billion. Watson understood what he had after the first patrol in 1967. He walked point on every behind-the-lines mission through the Mekong Delta. Every one. After his first tour, he went directly to Frankfurt Arsenal and described exactly what he needed. The engineers extended the magazine tube, 4 rounds to 7, 8 with one in the chamber. He told them what else he needed. Watson didn't walk out of that corridor alive because the Army equipped him correctly. He walked out because he sourced the weapon himself and rebuilt it for what the Mekong Delta actually was. How exactly he did that is what comes next. The official charge was violation of international humanitarian law. No international treaty had ever named the combat shotgun. Which specific treaty prohibited it in 1966? There was no treaty. The Judge Advocate General's office had reviewed this question before the Second World War, before any soldier standing on that tarmac had been born. Watson had carried the Ithaca 37 through 3 full tours in the Delta, 3 rotations. He understood the weapon's trade precisely. Lethal inside 20 yards, dead weight past 40, 100 shells weighing over 10 pounds against 100 rifle rounds at under 3. He had sourced his outside the supply chain, modified it for the Mekong, carried it through the kind of contact the official procurement process never designed for and never tested against. At Tan Son Nhut, the colonel had a 48-year-old argument and no binding authority behind it. Watson had 3 tours of what that argument was supposed to address. There is a specific quality to that exchange. A man who has been through 3 rotations of 10-yard contact listening to a man repeat a document without legal force. One of them knew what the Ithaca had done at close range in the dark. The other knew the regulation. The JAG ruling was categorical. No existing convention prohibited the combat shotgun. American military lawyers had closed that question before the fall of Berlin, 30 years before the colonel's commission. He cited the argument anyway. Watson left the weapon behind. After the war, the Army standardized on the Remington 870 and later the Mossberg series. The Ithaca was retired, too expensive to manufacture at scale. The colonel at Tan Son Nhut was reciting a German diplomatic objection, filed September 15, 1918. Germany's argument: buckshot caused unnecessary suffering and violated the laws of war. One submission. The Judge Advocate General reviewed it. The response was dry, 1 paragraph. JAG noted that the objecting government had deployed chlorine gas, flamethrowers, and serrated bayonets in that same war. Then dismissed the protest. Germany offered no rebuttal. No international treaty had ever prohibited shotguns. The Hague Conventions of 1907 addressed expanding bullets and asphyxiating gases. Shotguns were absent, not listed. not implied. The protest was not a legal argument, it was a record of fear. Units armed with shotguns consistently outperformed units without them in close contact engagements. Germany filed the protest because the weapon worked. That documented fear was what the protest preserved, and what kept circulating inside American officer culture for 52 years. The officer who repeated it at Ton Son Nhut in 1966 was born after JAG had already closed the file. Germany never filed a second protest. The argument resurfaced in American military briefings during Vietnam, more than half a century after JAG dismissed it. The air in the Mekong Delta pressed down on the chest like a wet sandbag. Standing water, rotting vegetation, something underneath both that clung to the back of the throat before the first 100 meters. Wet uniform fabric stuck to skin and stayed there for the rest of the patrol. The same German complaint from 1918 was still circulating in Army briefings as late as 1966. While the Army kept building itself for the open plains of Central Europe, and pointmen walked first on trails where the distance to an ambush measured the length of a school bus. The jungle was never quiet. Cicadas, frogs, water dropping off broad leaves, a background noise the nervous system registered after enough patrols as baseline. Then it stopped. No cicadas, no dripping, no frogs. The point man froze. His hand dropped to the weapon. 1 second, maybe 2. Somebody was about to die. Why did the M14 get soldiers killed before the first round left the barrel? 112 centimeters, the full length of the rifle. Trails in the Mekong Delta ran 60 to 90 centimeters wide. Bringing the M14 to bear on a trail that narrow meant catching vegetation, announcing position, burning 1.5 seconds the pointman did not have. The average ambush in Vietnam opened in under 1 second. More than 80% of all firefights erupted at 30 meters or less. More than half of all ambushes happened inside 15 meters, the length of a school bus. At that distance, the fight ended before the brain finished processing the first sound. The M14 was built for a different war. A 1,000-yard engagement line, open fields of fire, a Soviet armored advance across the plains of Central Europe. In 1964, it was still the standard infantry rifle, designed for conditions that did not exist in the Delta. Career officers who questioned it were questioning 20 years of procurement decisions at once. The early M16 offered a shorter profile and better handling in dense terrain. It also jammed. Delta humidity destroyed the action if maintenance slipped for a single day. A canal crossing fouled the bore. Monsoon rain alone was sufficient. That left a gap. Into it came a weapon most career officers treated as a relic, last taken seriously in the trenches of France in 1918. The point man walked first in every column, every patrol. His job was to locate the ambush by being the first thing it encountered. He needed a weapon that operated after 3 hours chest deep in canal water. A weapon that fit on a trail 60 centimeters wide. A weapon that did not require a clean bore or a steady hand or a full second to bring to bear. There was exactly one shotgun in the American inventory that met those requirements. 15 meters, the range at which more than half of all ambushes in Vietnam began. The man who reached those 15 meters had already survived the hours before them. Triple canopy jungle. Temperature above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity above 90%. The air didn't move. It pressed. He carried more than 80 pounds. Pack, rifle, ammunition, water. 36 kilograms on a body the heat was already taking apart. The medical threshold for heat stroke onset under continuous movement, full load, 38 degrees, roughly 2 hours. Average patrol in the Mekong Delta ran 6 to 8. No trails, only obstacles. Leeches worked into clothing at water crossings. They came out at halts, without sound, without standing. Punji pits waited on trail sections that looked identical to safe ground. Sharpened bamboo stakes smeared with human waste under concealed covers. Not designed to kill cleanly, designed to stop one man and cost 4 others their attention and time. The point man walked through all of it first, ahead of everyone. His job was to find the thing that would kill the squad before it got the chance. Heat degraded fine motor control. Dehydration narrowed judgment. 6 hours into a patrol, the hands that needed to work in under 3 seconds were already failing the man who owned them. 80 pounds at 38 degrees and 3 seconds to do something about it when the jungle stopped being quiet. Captured Viet Cong materials and post-war interrogations documented the same response. Enemy soldiers sometimes broke contact at the sound of a pump-action cycling. Not the shot, the reload. An aircraft would eventually leave. The man with the shotgun would not. Hold the trigger, keep pumping. Until the threat was gone or the tube ran empty, whichever came first. 80 pounds on his back, 38 degrees outside, 3 seconds to act, and Watson had already solved for the geometry before the Army thought to ask. Watson served with SEAL Team 2. Every decision he made about Sweetheart came from first contact. Why remove the stock? The answer wasn't tactical doctrine, it was physics. He started with the duckbill spreader choke. A hand fitted the flat metal flare to the muzzle. Experimental, developed in Frankfurt in the mid-1960s. No official field designation, no supply chain. Standard buckshot fires in a cone. Half the pellets bury in the mud, half disappear into the canopy. The duckbill compressed the spread into a horizontal ellipse 4 times wider than it was tall, directed at chest height. Not a cone, a curtain. He loaded number 4 buckshot, 27 pellets per shell. A standard double-aught Army load carried 9. Same chamber pressure, 3 times the coverage. At 20 yards, which Watson called long range in the Delta, the horizontal pattern left no gaps. 3 men walking abreast on a narrow trail fit inside it simultaneously. Nothing standing in that space remained standing. His assessment, the VCI shot, didn't seem to complain. The stock came last. Raising a shouldered weapon takes one motion, lifting to the shoulder, between carrying and shooting. In vegetation close enough to touch on both sides, at under 30 meters, that motion had a cost. Watson cut the stock to a pistol grip. Sweetheart hung from the sling at chest height, muzzle forward. The decision to fire and the act of firing became the same instant. The Navy also issued him a Remington Model 7188, select fire, fully automatic, capable of cycling faster than any pump. Watson called it finicky and fragile. It fouled in the Delta mud and needed maintenance the field didn't allow time for. He kept the Ithaca. Watson finished 3 tours. The citations recorded the actions. They didn't record what the grip cost him. Decades later, he still slept with a weapon within arm's reach, not because he expected a threat. 3 years of repetitive pump-stroke contact had built a reflex that ran below conscious control. The hand found the stock automatically. The weight was the baseline. That was the mechanism, not the metaphor. 300 kilometers north, on March 9, 1966, another man reached the same conclusion from inside a different perimeter. Camp A Shao, Tua Tien Province, 3 miles from the Laotian border. 17 U.S. Special Forces soldiers and 210 CIDG irregulars. 2,000 NVA regulars hit the wire. Artillery support was unreliable. Air cover dropped in and out of mountain weather. The battle lasted 4 days. Command Sergeant Major Benny Adkins carried a sawed-off 12-gauge pump loaded with buckshot. Most contact happened inside 20 meters. He fought after being wounded. He treated casualties under direct fire. The Medal of Honor citation covered multiple sustained actions across all 4 days. When asked about the shotgun, years later, his answer ran to 3 sentences. I did use it. I did. And a lot of hand grenades, nothing more. 75% of the CIDG irregulars died at Asha. Adkins had nothing to add about the shotgun. Watson had never elaborated either. Both men answered the same way. The weapon worked. After Vietnam, the Ithaca 37's slam-fire mechanism became a peacetime liability. Safety officers flagged it as a drop-fire hazard on stateside ranges. The milled steel receiver cost more to produce than stamped alternatives. Military procurement shifted to the Remington 870. The Ithaca 37 left U.S. military service. Vietnam needed weapons for distances under 15 meters, in mud, in humidity, in the dark. The Ithaca 37 solved that geometry 3 decades before the war started. The Army bought 60,920 units of a different gun instead. 72 pellets, under 3 seconds, 6¼ pounds empty, lighter than a full canteen. Stevens was the lowest price on the table. Ithaca was what point men chose when the choice was their own. Why did the Army buy the inferior weapon? The margin was $6.61 per unit. A contracting officer pulled 2 bid documents, 2 shotguns, 2 prices. The Stevens Model 77E came in lower. He marked it approved. 60,920 units, requisitioned, shipped, distributed across the theater. The department stamp came down. Decision closed. The M16 jammed. Through the early years of the war, the direct impingement gas system fouled in tropical humidity. Units reported stoppages during contact. Point men walked the lead position on patrol. They could not survive a malfunction at 10 meters. They found the Ithaca through whatever channel worked. It weighed 6¼ pounds empty. A full standard-issue canteen with water ran close to 7. Every ounce of that difference accumulated on a 6-hour patrol. Pull it from a flooded canal, pump once, and it fired. No clearance procedure, no second step. The Stevens had a lower number in a budget column. That was the criterion. 60,920 units, $6.61 per unit. The total savings over the Ithaca contract came to $402,877. 60,000 Stevens units went to the warehouses. Soldiers walking point chose the Ithaca anyway. 3 reasons. The third, the factory never designed it as a combat feature. On any standard pump shotgun, the sequence runs 4 steps. Pull the trigger, release it fully, pump the action, pull again. The Ithaca produced before 1975 carried no trigger disconnector. Hold the trigger back and pump the action. The bolt locks forward and the gun fires. No release required, no reset. No gap between the pump stroke and the shot. They called it slam fire. The sound was a sharp double strike, metal against the bolt face, then immediate discharge with no audible interval between them. 1 pump stroke, 1 result. The shooter performed no additional action beyond what he was already doing. 5 rounds of double-aught buckshot from a standard tube delivered 45 pellets in under 3 seconds. Watson's extended 8-round configuration sent 72 pellets through the same window. Each pellet measured 1.33 caliber, all arriving within the width of a doorway. 45%. A joint service report found that a shotgun raised the probability of hitting a man-sized target by 45% over a submachine gun burst. At close range, the margin over an assault rifle doubled. In February 1968, North Vietnamese Army regulars held buildings in Hue at 5 to 10 meters from American infantry positions, exactly the distance where that margin stopped being a statistic. The factory produced no manual for slam fire. No training program covered the technique. Soldiers in Quang Tri discovered it in contact and passed it laterally, man to man, before the next patrol left the wire. The Ithaca delivered the capability without instruction, without modification, without intent. The Joint Service Report stated it plainly. At ranges under 15 meters, no individual small arm in the American inventory matched the shotgun's probability of incapacitation. Slam fire came from a missing part. The bottom port was a design decision, one that held in conditions no manual anticipated. Watson pulled the Ithaca from the canal. He didn't drain it, didn't clear the action, pressed the trigger. What stops a shotgun from firing after submersion? Every other pump shotgun of the era had a port cut into the right side of the receiver. Wide enough to fit a thumb, wide enough for canal water, paddy silt, and debris to reach the action directly. The Ithaca loaded and ejected from one port at the bottom. Both sides of the receiver stayed sealed. Solid Parkerized steel, no lateral openings. No other shotgun in the American inventory backed that up consistently in field conditions. Weight was the second variable. The Ithaca came in at 6.3 pounds unloaded. The Winchester Model 1997 ran close to 8. The Remington 870 pushed past 7. In Quang Tri Province, 100-degree heat, triple canopy overhead, 85 pounds of standard combat load already on the frame. The gap did not stay abstract. 1.5 pounds. Another full magazine. The bottom port and the 6.3-pound receiver entered Army inventory in 1962, a contract for roughly 22,000 units. That same design had been on civilian gun shop shelves in upstate New York for 25 years. Southeast Asia was deteriorating. The Army needed combat shotguns. Ithaca got the contract. Serial prefix S. Numbers running from approximately 1,000 to 23,000. US stamped on the receiver. Those three markers identify every Vietnam-era Ithaca in any collection. Parkerized finish, 20-inch barrel, plain stock, plastic butt plate, no sling swivels on early production models. The military variant looked like something leaning against a farmhouse door in Ithaca, New York, because that is exactly where Ithaca built it. Tompkins County, Central New York State, 22,000 units. Operation Rolling Thunder launched in March 1965 and ran for 3 years, drawing personnel across all 5 military regions of South Vietnam. 22,000 shotguns covered a fraction of them. The ones that reached the field went to pointmen. In Quang Tri Province, on a trail at 2 in the morning, the pointman moved forward. Parkerized receiver, 20-inch barrel, pulse in the throat. 22,000 units under a single contract in 1962. Ithaca had been supplying the Army long before that. M1911 pistols, M3 submachine guns, military shotguns through the Second World War. The relationship was established before Vietnam was even a name on a map. Where did the bottom port come from? John Browning filed the patent in 1915, the same year British troops first used shotguns to clear German trenches on the Western Front. The gun built around that design didn't reach a single shelf until 22 years later, because another man's secondary patent kept it grounded. Harry Howland was Ithaca's designer. He worked from Browning's concept: ejection below, loading below, receiver closed on top. Remington had used the foundational patent first, producing it as the Model 17. Howland waited for that to expire. Then he found the Pedersen patent blocking the same design from a different angle. He waited again. The gun was ready to ship as the Model 33 in 1933. The name was chosen, the action was complete. The Pedersen patent was not. The year passed. The name changed to match the calendar. Nobody touched the action. Nobody altered the geometry. The bottom port remained exactly where Browning had drawn it 2 decades before. By 1937, the Model 37 reached dealers, into a depression, 2 years before the war. By 1940, Ithaca was filling government orders again, alongside M1911 pistols and M3 submachine guns. The name Model 37 was not marketing. The 37 was the year the patents finally ran out, nothing more. A number stamped on a receiver that recorded how long one man waited to build a design that wasn't his to begin with. 1915 to 1937, 22 years.